Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Part 5. Serious. People of Reddit. What is your downright scariest real-life story? Withdrawing from liquor. I've been hospitalized for withdrawals multiple times and it's absolutely terrifying. I was in the ICU once for 8 days due to seizures, auditory and visual hallucinations, delusions, tremors. I was unable to walk or get out of my bed at all and had to use a bedpan. They had alarms on my bed to alert nurses if I moved. But the scary part was the hallucinations and delusions. Being in hospital and hearing constant alarms and beeping noises had scared me. I kept thinking that my fiancé has been shot in the parking lot and all the sirens were for him. I kept thinking that the nurses were trying to hurt me and they looked insanely creepy. It's something you have to experience to understand the true terror. I've been through a lot of scary stuff, including serious physical violence, natural disasters, and being robbed at gunpoint with the gun to my forehead. But the scariest by far was a result of my own actions and my own brain playing tricks on me. Don't drink, kids.
About 10 years ago, my husband talked me and my family into going tinker tubing. That's when you sit on an inner tube and float down a creek. A bus drops you off and you get off the tube where you parked. He said he went as a kid and it's like an hour-long lazy river trip. We all agreed to go, but what we didn't realize is that it had been raining for days up there. Despite it being July, the water was ice cold. About 5 minutes in, we hit rapids. I flipped over backwards on my tube and, despite being a strong swimmer, having a life jacket on and holding onto the tube, and I could barely keep my head above water. I got back on a minute later, but it was one of the longest minutes of my life and set the tone for the rest of the trip. A couple minutes later, my aunt flipped off of her tube and smashed her tailbone into a rock. I got pulled into a whirlpool and my husband dislocated his shoulder, pulling me out of it. My cousin went down a 10-foot waterfall and the water held him under. He thought he was going to drown, but was able to walk along the bottom and got out. He climbed back up and was able to warn the rest of us not to go that way. I was frightened. I cried and clung onto every rock and branch that would hold me, just so I could catch my breath. The ride was supposed to be an hour. It took most of my family less than half of that time to reach the drop point. It took me more than 3. When I finally reached it, I was pulled to the other side of the creek and missed it. I had no idea what to do and the drop point was getting further and further away. Finally, someone yelled to me, "It's shallow, you can reach the ground there." I took a chance and hopped off my tube and he was right. When I got out of the water, I realized my fingers and face were blue. Luckily, I was all right once I warmed up a bit. It was 10 years ago and I still get flashbacks from that day.
So one night when I was around 7 years old, I was spending the weekend over at my dad's. I would say it was around 2 in the morning and everyone was in bed. My dad was single at the time and he had a roommate who lived downstairs and worked at night, so I rarely saw him. Anyways, for some reason, I wake up. I look at the doorway and I see the black mass staring at me while it has its hands out in the air like saying, "Surprise." I was petrified and I pulled the blankets over my head like any scared kid would do. Maybe 4 seconds later, I peer out of front under the blankets and the figure was gone. The second time I came into contact with this figure was maybe no more than a year later. It was maybe around 9 at night and I was going to bed. So I get in bed and I start playing with my stuffed animals for a little bit, and as I'm playing, I see what I presume to be the same figure from the last encounter, walking into my room and disappearing. I get real quiet and hide under my blankets like before, and I don't think I got out from under the blankets that night. My third encounter with the figure took place in the early morning. I was lying in my dad's bed, waiting for him to get ready. As I'm lying there, I glance over to where the nightstand is and I see the same figure sitting on the door of the open cabinet on the nightstand. This is the closest I have ever been to it. For some reason, I don't remember what happened after that occurred, but that would be my last sighting of the figure, for now. However, a few years later when I was around 10 or 11, I did catch some audio footage during the middle of the day. So I decided I wanted to make a YouTube video about how to make something out of Lego. So I'm recording it and I don't hear anything else but me talking. I end the video and go to the bathroom. I then go back to my room and replay the video. Everything is normal until I hear this echo sound in the background. I didn't hear it during recording at all. I got freaked out and ran downstairs to where my dad was and showed him. The video was uploaded to YouTube, but since it was uploaded to my school account, they asked me to take down all my videos on the school account. Recently, I went back through that tablet to try and find the video that I recorded, but it was gone, like someone deleted it. This might not be the last time I encounter the figure, you never know. Sorry for quality, I'm very tired.
Stalked by 4 sketchy dudes when I was 16 while walking the short distance from work home. I think they were drinking because I saw paper bags and bottles where they were hanging out. It was broad daylight and I had my mace, but the area was mountainous, so it was partially a hike home. I knew I was being followed, but I didn't want to make any sudden movements or run until I knew I could get to a safety point ASAP. It was terrifying and I could hear them taunting me and joking about how I'll get worn out soon. I should add that I ran track and field, so I knew I could run when I needed to. This other older guy rides up by me on a bike because he noticed me being followed, and he gave me an opportunity to run while he created a distraction. I ran hard and didn't look back. I'm so thankful that he was there because I was probably pretty close to being to get gang raped somewhere on that mountain. I have a severe phobia of being followed/stalked now.
I spent most of my life staying at grandma's house. She was my everyday babysitter, my summer camp, etc. She would poison cats like it was going out of style, then adopt some more, heck ever witness her drown one. She was cold, you couldn't be in the same room as her, and if she was in the living room you had to be in the back room or outside. If she was in the back room you had to be in the living room or outside. You couldn't touch her things, you couldn't make too much noise, and you had to eat what she ate and count your calories. She played the part though. She would say I love you and hug you, be all sweet in front of other people. She was grandma after all. But she always bit her tongue when she hugged you and only hugged you in front of other people. I always got the distinct feeling my presence was bothersome, but whatever. You didn't bother grandma, she didn't bother you. I was very independent. Around the time I was 8 she started fostering other kids. This was weird. Very weird. Grandma didn't like me, let alone other people's kids, and especially misbehaving kids. I caught on soon though. The foster kids would disappear. They'd misbehaved or annoy her and then they'd be gone. She never told me where they'd go. Just they are gone. My parents didn't care either, they had bigger concerns. After all, my grandma was the least dangerous adult option they had. The longest lasting kid lasted for 3 months. Most were only there for a week tops. And then they disappeared. I was always afraid that if I annoyed grandma I end up like the poisoned cats, or the disappeared foster kids. Never did find out what happened to them, just gone. I wouldn't be surprised if she just returned them all, or killed them all. Either way she was that kind of grandma. Moved into an old house we nicknamed Red Roof since it was the only home in the area with a red roof, and it was easier for children to identify and come over to have play dates daily. It quickly turns dark from there. The first day my mother and I moved in, I was around 9. We were watching TV when the candle on the shelf flew towards us. We didn't yet have electricity at this point. Moving on a week later, my mother was cleaning while I was settling with homework for my new school, and she pulled what she thought was a rusty machete off the top of the old fridge it came with. It stunned her, though she put it back and decided to ignore it. Us being islanders, knives and machetes are common tools. Creepy things constantly happened the next few days, to my toys playing themselves, nightmares and all. Till it looked to be coffee stains seeping through my bedroom walls. I had a cat, Mishka. She's adventurous yet would never go to the basement, and neither would we got awful vibes from it. My mother has taken a peek once, and she describes it as if everything that went under there froze in time. For example, she saw a spider frozen mid-web making along with rodents. I believe the thing that pushed my mother over the edge is when she couldn't scrub off the coffee-looking stains, until she realized that it's not coffee, but blood seeping through the paint on the walls. She recognized the spatters from working in the medical field. They did an investigation. It turns out an elderly lady was stabbed multiple times with said machete, the murder weapon being hid up high, explaining the blood in my room. Anyways, forensics didn't clean at all, it was all painted over, giving it a totally different meaning to the house called Red Roof. It was later blessed by a priest and we moved out. I was home alone when I was around 11 or 12. I had super bad social anxiety at this point in my life, so when I heard a knock on the door, even though it was a postman with a package, I thought he'd go away after the first time, but he kept knocking for like 5 more minutes and that was my last straw. I was also paranoid at this age due to other stuff going on, so I went into my father's workshop room in our basement, grabbed a hammer and hid in my basement. Dude kept aggressively knocking for 10 more minutes until my parents came home, who had assumed he'd just got there and he handed it off to them. Sometimes I wonder why he just kept insistently knocking. I think he may have seen me on my couch through the window and I just didn't notice. Either way, creeped me out for a really long time. I don't think knocking that long is normal. I got shingles at age 9. It's ruined my life. I'm living with PTSD, and depression and anxiety as a result of it. I'm living with chronic illness and pain. I am always tired. Always empty. I spend an hour every day in front of the mirror just checking my body for rashes. Every single day. I have panic attacks. I don't trust my body. I'm 16 and life has been hell for 7 years, and guesses what, it continues to be like that. I've reached a point where I can't see a future for me. I just exist at this point. And the worst thing is that no one took the time to help me deal with both the physical and mental pain. I'm just so done. When I was 9 years old, I was on holiday and a circus had come to town and they were using a farm next to the holiday homes to store their elephants. I heard in the playground that you could feed the elephants, and so I took my 2-year-old sister with me to the field. There was no one supervising and the elephants were in a small plastic pen. There were some lettuces in a truck nearby, so we took the lettuces and were feeding the elephants by hand and having a great time until one of the elephants wrapped its trunk around my sister and swung her round over its head and then dropped her on her head. It was over in 5 seconds and thankfully she was unharmed, but my heart skipped a beat or two. There are quite a few times who came up, but there's one time that I'm pretty sure I got away from the situation in just the right time. I was pretty young, 20-something, and I couldn't get any CB, since everyone dealing that stuff was out of stock, so I got the address to one of the guys highest up in the ranking, if you get what I mean. I was told to enter from the back, and so I did. The first instinct was just pounding in my head. My inner self screamed, "Get out! Get out!" I was freaking out so bad, and that made me try to not show it even more. There were expensive things all over the place, but it seemed a little run down anyway, really hard to explain. A lady came and sat beside me, and she was really bruised both on the face and the arms. She was quite out of it, but asked if I wanted a smoke. I said yes to not come across as rude. All the time I mapped out a way to easy get out of there in the fastest way possible. I even put my boots so that I could kind of just jump in them and dash out the back door. It took some time, but eventually the drug lord came out from one of the rooms and greeted me with a hard handshake. He showed me, I don't know how many, plates/blocks of the smoking stuff I was there for. Now my heart rose even more, since it was pretty obvious that he thought I was there to buy a big stock. I was just a casual smoker, and now I stood there with one of the high rankers. He got really annoyed when I said I just wanted 5 to 10 grams or so. Irritated, he cut up a tiny bit and put it on a scale, and then he asked what more I wanted. I whispered, "No, I'm good," and gave him all the money I had on me, and on the way out I registered that he had a gun on the waist. It may seem kind of lame, but the feeling when I got out. Wow, what an adrenaline rush. It really was like I had gotten out of that with only luck. It was like I suddenly could breathe, as if I just had been underwater. As soon as I couldn't see the residents when I looked back, I just ran. I have worse, but on a psychological level, this really stands out to me. Did shrooms once and had hallucinations of thousands of cockroaches crawling all over and inside of me. Along with that I was experiencing a constant déjà vu that made me think that I was trapped in a never-ending cycle of being eaten alive by cockroaches. After about 2 hours, that felt like years, of trying to fight them, I gave up, accepted my fate and began to meditate. Eventually they stopped being aggressive towards me and they all sat down somewhere on my body and began to meditate with me. Then I just sat with them and vibed while I felt like some kind of cockroach god or something. Although I fortunately managed to somehow make the best out of the situation, seeing, feeling and listening to them crawling into my mouth and arse is by far the scariest and most disgusting thing I've ever experienced, especially since I've always been scared of cockroaches. Don't know if you could call it a real-life story as I was hallucinating them, but it definitely felt real. I was a bartender at restaurant and this was around 2007. I was going through a terrible time in life and during closing I was talking to a friend/customer about it and he suggests I go and see this psychic. I immediately dismiss it and go about life for another painful month or two. I ended up seeing this person again and ask for the contact information. I call this lady, we'll call her Janice. Says she doesn't do phone readings and if I really wanted a reading that I would have to go to her apartment. Now, I was nervous and intrigued at the same time, so I planned to go and see what's up. Fast forward 2 weeks and I make the train trek to where she lived. She lived in the projects, so I was already nervous. I go up to the floor she lives on and knocked. An older lady answered the door, very nice. I was told to wait in her living room. After a few minutes she calls me into her kitchen. Now I'm starting to become really skeptical because it is totally not the setup I imagined. At all. Like it's just a dining room table. No tarot cards, no paraphernalia, nothing. Just a notebook. She tells me the reading is $30. Now, I am really skeptical at this point because I had brought a few hundred with me and what can I really expect for such a small amount? I resign myself and I wasted the day but continue on to be polite. She asks me to write down my full name. She mutters a few words and her eyes roll into the back of her head and another voice starts to speak. Like a man's voice. Not like she tried to sound like a man. But a man's voice. I am terrified at this point but I cannot move from my chair. All I can do is listen. Whatever this was speaking told me that is still coming true to this day. Told me my sister would die of an overdose, which I dismissed because my sister was just fine. Ended up happening. Told me another family member would take their own life. Ended up happening. Told me no matter how hard life is to never commit suicide because I didn't want to end up in there with them. Told me also good things that happened. Certain things predicted haven't happened yet, but a few things keep ending up to be true. To it is still terrifying. As far as I know, she doesn't live there anymore and I have not been back. So, I was in junior year in high school. In our school, because we had so many students, public school, that we had 4 different lunch periods. I had lunch period A. Something told me to snack on my chocolate-covered peanuts I kept in my locker before lunch throughout the day. So when I went to lunch, I sat right in front of the trophy cases next to the counselor's office. That hallway is called the Yorktown Hall. All the hallways had American-themed names because our team was the Patriots. One day the teachers are ushering us into the gymnasium, no one told us anything. I grabbed my lunchbox and booked it. If you've ever seen a fat man run, then you know it's urgent. After a while they locked us in the gym and forced us into the bleachers. They also insisted we turn off our phones. It was a while until we found out, teenagers who haven't eaten since 6 to 8 in the morning will never listen. Turns out a man was supposed to be in the bathroom right in the Yorktown Hall, which is less than 3 meters from where I was sitting, who had called and threatened to shoot up the school and that he had planted bombs in other bathrooms. After a while they started funneling other students inside. I didn't think that was strange at the time, but looking back, that may have been the stupidest thing because the person could have just slipped among the students and did it anyway. For context, by the time they start funneling us out, it's about 4:30 p.m. We'd been in there since 10:30 a.m., so about 6 hours of just sitting around, not allowed to use our phones or leave to go to bathroom until about halfway through, monitored by teachers. Someone had stepped on my sandwich I had on the floor. I remember seeing a boot print in the bread. My mom left work at the hospital early to come and grab me, and I remember nearly knocking her over, hugging her because I was scared. We were eventually allowed to go get our bags and leave the premises, but news crews and police were watching our every move. My mom was parked out into the street because the parking lot was full of parents. I remember going to Baskin-Robbins afterward because, well, I was hungry. But the look on her face when I described everything to her remains in my face to this day. I live with this knowing that it could easily happen, even to me. It's a strange world we live in. Eventually they found out the man calling was from Kansas. They changed the school shooter protocol in the school as well afterward. I was 11, it was summer, and my sister and I had been visiting my dad in another state. This was on the drive home. My mother was an addict and she had her boyfriend riding with us. She was drinking and driving and we were lying in the back seat. This was the days before everyone used seatbelts. I was in that almost asleep place listening to Amarillo by Morning on the radio. I heard a man's voice call my name and say, "You're going to be in a car accident. Don't worry, you'll be okay." The next instant gravel was crunching and my mom yelled, "Hang on, girls." Our car flipped end over end a couple of times. My mom flew from the driver's seat into the back seat with me and my sister. The car stopped and the back door flew open and my mom fell out. I helped my younger sister and people came rushing from their house. I had a broken left humerus, upper arm bone, and my arm was bent at a 90-degree angle. My mother went in and out of consciousness, but when she was alert she saw her boyfriend. He had been thrown from the car and the car landed on him, killing him. My mother had a fractured neck and me and my sister seemed pretty okay. I know with no doubt in my mind Jesus/God spoke to me to warn me. I felt the peace and love flow over me like warm oil from the tops of my head down. Police did interview me about the alcohol due to all the liquor bottles. My mother was not charged for drunk driving or any related crime. I do remember him being very upset because she could have gotten in trouble. I still get emotional when I hear Amarillo by morning. When I feel like life is tough or unfair, I always remember God knows exactly where I am at any time and He's looking out for me. I was home alone. It was around midnight and I was upstairs in my bed, when I saw a light come into my room from my window. I thought it was just a car since my window is directed towards an apartment complex and a parking lot, and the lights made my wall lit up. But the light was flashing in an odd way, not like any car headlights I've seen. It was also moving rapidly from side to side, which again awoke my concern. I got up, walked over to the window, and saw a man by the parking lot, flashing a flashlight into my window. I immediately ducked down when I saw him and started to panic. I didn't look again until minutes later, and he was gone. I was panicking, thinking he'll return and try to break in. I almost jumped downstairs and checked all the doors that they were locked, and they were. I turned some lights on, to make it look as someone was awake, and then headed back upstairs. It took a while for me to fall asleep again, and I never saw him again, but is still really nervous when I see car headlights from my window. I had a dog that I'd taken care of since she was 8 months old. I was no contact with most of my family over the entire course of her life. She and I were inseparable. She was with me through an abusive living situation that I escaped in 2017. She turned 10 with no issues. Her vet told me she was incredibly healthy and chipper for a dog her age. I fed her good food, got her regular dental cleanings, and exercised her regularly. Early October of 2021, one morning she seems perfectly fine. She brings her favorite toy to me, asking to play. I played with her for a little bit, and she suddenly stops and starts swaying back and forth like she's losing her balance. After that she's frighteningly lethargic. My roommate and I tend to her while I try to find an emergency vet who can see her quickly. Every single one is 30+ minutes away and states they have a 1-hour wait, while being completely apathetic to our situation. She seems to improve slightly after an hour and becomes more alert. Then about 25 minutes later, she becomes incontinent. Within 5 minutes she fades and starts to close her eyes. My roommate attempts CPR on her, but she's just gone. Completely gone. After everything a vet I spoke with said the symptoms were consistent with heart failure, and there would likely have been no saving her. Regardless, I still feel a lot of anger towards the emergency vet offices I dealt with and the situation as a whole. My dog was dying and none of them cared. I brought home another dog in March and am still super paranoid about her well-being. I'm now incredibly distrustful of vets' offices due to the apathy I encountered. It's pretty terrifying knowing that if she gets sick the people who could help her really don't care and won't. Hearing comments about, well, at least she passed quickly, best of a bad situation, etc., also inspire a lot of rage, as it was the first thing out of everyone's mouth after hearing about my first dog's death. Sometimes life is with no silver lining. Kind of wish people would stop pretending it wasn't. This isn't the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, but it definitely scared me, and it's recent with a video. I actually made a post of this a few weeks ago. One night while I was outside smoking at like 2 a.m., I heard this creepy loud screeching in my neighborhood. It scared me, whatever it was loud and it was close. I noped back inside. Every night for the next several weeks I heard this screeching from various parts of the neighborhood. Sometimes close, sometimes far away. But I heard it every night. Well, eventually I recorded a video of the sound and posted it on Reddit to see if anyone knew what it might be. Guesses were a bit all over the place, but it wasn't really truly known what it was. Until 3 nights ago. My son gets woken up and comes bursting into my office at 1 a.m. and he goes, "Dad, It sounds like someone's dying outside. I turned my music off and sure enough there's that screeching noise, but it's directly outside his window. And when I say directly, I mean it was close enough it could have been in the room with him. So I'm only half stupid, but I turn off the light in his room, grab my super flashlight and shine it out of the window. Mountain lion right outside his damn window. Thing was huge. Just doing the screeching noise. It ran off almost immediately after I shined the light on it. Pretty crazy. I don't live in the country, not a rural area. It's semi-city around me as it's one of the outlier towns of Omaha. One summer I was mowing lawns for cash and one I did weekly was my aunt and uncle's. I was only 16 or so at the time, but my mom would drop me off and I would get to work early on the weekend. There was a chance that they would be home or I would just be alone and would keep on mowing. Anyway, after my mom had left I got started quickly. I started with the front, reasonably sized front yard and backyard, and because I was near the street with cars occasionally passing by I was fine. When I was finishing the front yard and moved to the backyard I was instantly hit with this extreme sense of dread. I started looking around everywhere I could, and even had to take a second before I kept going. It was awful, the worst feeling. It's difficult to put down into words, but I could feel my heart beating throughout my entire body. I was constantly looking over my shoulder even if I had just checked a second ago. I was rushing through the backyard. I was terrified of nothing. I just had the feeling of being watched and the feeling of if I wasn't careful I was going to die. I'm not even sure if I finished mowing before I threw the mower back into the shed and full sprinted out of the backyard and right onto the road. I couldn't even look away from the house. I called my mom instantly and told her how I was feeling, how I was terrified of something and felt like I was watched constantly. She pulls up about 10 minutes later and I hop in and tell her to leave immediately. She didn't even pull into the driveway. I told her how I felt extreme dread and the feeling of utter despair and that I couldn't do that ever again. Then, she said, "Mom, it's crazy you mention that." Me, why? Mom, when I got home I shut the door and put all of my stuff down. I went into the bathroom, sat down, and then front door of our house opened and what sounded like a man walked in. I was sitting there in shock at what I was hearing. Me, you're joking, right? This isn't a time to joke because what I felt was something I wouldn't wish upon even my worst enemy. Mom, no, I asked if someone was there and when I walked out the door was shut and no one was in the house. I searched everywhere. Me, are you serious? Mom, yeah, which is why when you called I got over there quickly because something happened to me too. I swear on everything on that day me and my mom both shared horrifying experiences at the same time. For some reason I haven't ever felt that way again, not that I ever wished to, but I did research and found nothing on it. My mom told my aunt because they are best friends and then years later I told her my perspective and it spooked her. To this day I'm not sure what it was, but it was something sinister. Watching the church I was abused and burned to the ground. Relieving, but absolutely terrifying. I was around 8 years old. 4 years into the habitual abuse I was put through at this church and the fire alarm went off. It was mid-confession, and the pastor ended up carrying me out of the church and immediately arrested once he got out because police had found evidence of him being involved in my abuse. I forget how the other pastors and priests and whatnot got out without being arrested. I'll have to ask my dad. I watched him get taken away by police while I stood there watching this place burn to the ground, firefighters trying to water it down but to no success as they were too late to save the church. My parents were there since the church wasn't far from my house and just sat and watched with me whilst they bawled their eyes out. I didn't cry because I didn't know how to process what was happening. I mean, no one teaches you what to do when you're watching the church that held so many vile men and women that abused you senselessly straight up burned to the ground. If you're wondering how it happened, someone who was allegedly a victim of the church's abuse years prior to mine had set fire to it out of anger. It's just kind of a rumor between me and the other kids involved. I have some friends who were abused too at that church with me, but nothing was confirmed and the case was dropped due to lack of evidence. But there you go. Scariest thing I ever witnessed.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.